Hello, everyone. I am Khadija Qader. I am a PM at Microsoft, and today I will talk about how to navigate and become a growth leader. I share visuals from Miranda Oakley's climb up El Capitan in Yosemite. This is because navigating your career is similar to free climbing, and she broke the women's solo speed record climbing up the nose of El Capitan in less than 22 hours. So I hope this talk helps you become a growth leader just as fast. All right, a little about me. I graduated from the University of Washington, Seattle with an HCI engineering degree, which is human-computer interaction. I did a PM internship at Microsoft and then returned full-time after graduation. My 3 years at Microsoft, right out of college, I worked at Windows Phone, Windows licensing, and then I went to Cisco and worked at Webex Teams, and then boomerang back to Microsoft to work at Microsoft Teams and Your Phone. My hobbies include reading books, listening to podcasts. I am a Malcolm Gladwell fan. I love digging into behavioral economics. I swim, I bike, I travel to national parks. I've taken up pour painting, and you can see the 4-panel canvas that I put up in my bedroom. And I love cooking up new recipes and taking landscape photography. So today's agenda goes over learning what is growth and how do you transition to a growth PM? How do you succeed as a growth PM? And then how do you become a growth leader? So let's start off by understanding growth. Andrew Chen, who is a growth expert and used to be the head of Uber Rider Growth, described it as applying a scientific method to increase business metrics like revenue, acquisition, retention, engagement. The goal of growth is to get the largest percentage of target audience to experience the core value as quickly as possible. So where does product end and growth begin? If you're working on product, you're building core value. If you're working on growth, you're getting the largest percentage of target audience to experience the core value as quickly as possible. And together, when both product and growth come together, it allows us getting users to experience the core value as often as possible. And this is how I define growth in my own words. Put simply, growth is to increase product usage. So let's begin by defining the different PM roles in the industry. You have your feature PM who drives core value by building new features. And then you have the technical PM who drives core functionality by building new technology. We have the product marketing manager role who drives acquisition and monetization. Then we have a relatively new role that started about 3 years ago called the data analytics PM. They drive impact by analyzing data and usage trends. They can also be doing side of feature PMing as well. And then we have the growth PM role, which drives impact by increasing product usage. The last two roles, since they're relatively new, like growth PM came about 5 years ago, and these two roles, basically you will see a mix of feature PM or marketing manager along with growth role. You will see a mixture of them across the industry, but now the last two are picking up a lot of traction, and dedicated roles have been created for them. The takeaway here, though, is to understand that the differences that exist between these roles, any PM can actually wear different hats between these roles or actually specialize in them. Now let's talk about how one can transition towards a growth PM role. Basically, you can come from any background. It could be any of the PM roles we just went over, or you could come from an engineering or data scientist background. It doesn't matter. Regardless of that, how you transition into it is that you consciously carve your path in. You use your passion to find new opportunities, to practice your passion. Those opportunities will allow you to learn new skills. And from those skills, you can develop strengths. And then again, you do a cycle of finding new interests that can become your passion and then go and finding new opportunities. Finding opportunities means you can go find a new job that allows you to, for instance, if you like to work on user experience, you'll go find a job that allows you to work on that. Or you can ask your manager to give you projects that are focused on user experience. So I will share my examples. Right out of college, my passion was user experience, and I used it to find opportunities where I could work on user experience, and that was at Windows Phone team. There, I picked up the skills to do user research, designing and wireframing, designing web and mobile features, and doing user research on them, user workflows, and agile product development. So out of those skills, over time, as I kept practicing them, I developed the strengths of user experience and agile product development. So this is an example of using one passion to find opportunities and build your skills up so that your passion builds up to become your strength. Now let's talk about when I transitioned towards Growth PM, which was relatively recent in the last 4 years. I became passionate about experimentation. So I created opportunities at work by asking and taking up projects that dealt with experimentation, both at Microsoft Teams and Your Phone app, so that I could develop skills like setting the right metrics, forecasting, analyzing data to make decisions, having research or data-backed treatments. All of these skills, I started practicing them. After 2 years of hard work, experimentation became my strength. And a natural segue from experimentation is growth. I got fascinated by growth, and slowly it became my new passion. I would read up as many articles online and take training on growth to figure out what skills I need to develop. And as soon as I figured that out, I started working on them. For instance, I figured out how growth funnels, loops, and strategies interact with each other. I found out that retention in every stage of the user journey is very important. And now I'm working on making growth and retention my strengths. It's a work in progress. So I hope this serves as an example that no matter what your background is, how do you transition yourself towards a growth PM role? Now let's talk about succeeding as a growth PM. How do you aggressively build your experience and expertise in this area? So I have listed 4 essential roles that a growth PM should be able to do very well. The first one is being an opportunity identifier. You should study the complete product funnel to identify the top opportunities and gaps that your team should go after. You should be able to weigh engineering, user experience, research, marketing, and the business goals, all of it, to drive the best growth strategy for your product and for your team. You should be a data-driven decision maker. You should validate data. You should validate with data before committing to any course. And you can apply the Amazon leadership principle is right a lot here, because when you validate every decision you make with data, your judgment becomes strong, your insight becomes really good, and you pretty much seek diverse perspectives before making any decision, and you also work to disconfirm your own beliefs, making sure that data is the fact that's guiding you towards the right course. The third one is being an experimenter. You should experiment often, you should take calculated risk, and you should course correct quickly based on learnings. If you don't find yourself course correcting, that means you're not taking enough risk. Course correcting happens when you try something and it fails, and you quickly react to fix it. Failure means that you're trying new things, testing old boundaries and exploring new possibilities. You're off the edge of the map. If you find yourself never changing course, you're playing it too safe. And that mentality might be sustainable for a time, but eventually long-term success and growth requires a leap of faith. And last, you need to be a clear communicator. You should build cross-team and cross-discipline collaboration to have high impact with clear communication of problems, goals, proposed solutions, execution, and expectation. All right, let's dive a bit deeper into each of these essential roles of a growth PM. So what is an opportunity identifier? Let's start off by looking at two models that a growth PM should know. One is a growth funnel, or called the pirate funnel because of the R. It is the funnel where at the top you have acquisition, and then it is followed by activation, where users that you have just acquired, how are they starting up in the app? How are they just exploring the new features? And then you have retention, where the user has become engaged and they use the app often. And then you have referral, where this engaged user is referring your app, sharing it with their friends and family. And at the bottom, you have the revenue, that out of all these referrals and acquisitions, that new users that you're getting, is there any revenue coming out of it? So now the other model that has come in recently is called a growth loop. It does not mean that the funnel is no longer useful. It is, but what the funnel does not capture is that the users that come in don't just go out at the bottom and then leave your product. They are retaining. So the growth loop, imagine it like a loop that fits between retention and then goes back to acquisition. One way to also understand loops is that they feed themselves. The action of one user creates an output, which creates another new user. Let's illustrate that example. So let's take an example of SurveyMonkey. You have, number one, you have a new user who has taken a survey, and at the bottom of the survey, he sees a SurveyMonkey branding. And he has the option at that point to sign up. So he signs up, a certain percentage of, imagine about 100 people took a survey, maybe about 50 people thought, okay, I'll sign up. So now you go to number two, where out of those 50% of the 50 people who signed up, maybe about half of them want to create their own surveys and send it out. So you now have 25 people who send out surveys. And you will come to number three, where surveys have been sent out. And maybe every person sent it out to about 4 people. So 25 people sending out to 4 people. You have about 100 people who got the survey. And again, all of those 100 people who saw the survey, they see the branding, and they have an opportunity at the bottom of the survey after completing that survey to say, hey, I'm going to sign up. So what you see here is that an existing user created a survey, sent it out, contacted new users who again convert. So it's a loop that keeps feeding and creating more acquisition because of the actions of your existing users. All right. Now, how do you become a data-driven decision maker? Basically, the main steps of a growth process is an experiment. So you start off with a hypothesis where you have data-backed or research-backed rationale. Then you prioritize your ideas out of all the features that you have in your backlog, all the hypotheses you have written up. You will prioritize based on ROI, which is determined by impact forecasting, costing, and having target audience numbers. This requires a lot of data analysis, but once you keep practicing it with your data scientists, it becomes easier and easier. Then you move on from prioritizing to experimentation. Here, before you experiment or give it to the developer for building any prototype, you actually go explore many treatments with your data scientist and your designer and researcher. And you decide if A/B testing is needed. At that point, you give it to the engineer, they build it, and then you execute on having your experiment, maybe A/B testing, whatever you need. Once the experiment concludes, you have your data analysis part. You look for statistical significance, you watch out for false positives, and you share back learnings for both your wins and failures because both of them give you some lessons. All right, let's illustrate this process with an example. So this is Spotify's Wrapped feature, where at the end of the year, it sends its users a card telling them which are the 5 top artists they have listened to, the top 5 songs they have listened to in that year, maybe on repeat, and the total number of minutes they have listened and their top genre. This feature was released by Spotify in 2015, predominantly on the web and desktop apps, and they were just simple cards. So if I need to experiment on this is how I would go about writing down that experiment. How would I do it? I would write down the hypothesis to be this. If we show users Spotify's end of the year wrapped numbers as stories, then users are more likely to enjoy and share on social media, thereby creating a viral growth loop. My data rationale here would be the yearly trend of views and interactions with the Wrapped feature since 2015. Every year since 2015, I would potentially see that users are clicking on it, they're navigating through it and looking at more cards. So it tells me that users do like it. So it is worthy of investing further in this feature. My experiment will be to show Wrapped on Spotify mobile app as stories. Then I will choose my success metrics and say, I will be looking for these metrics to move in my results. And those metrics will be measuring conversion on Wrapped story views and shares to social media. And as we know, just last month in December 2020, Spotify released this same card, but on the mobile app in that form factor as a story that is ready for share easily. And as we all know, it went viral. And I mean, part of it could be the fact that everyone's at home and Spotify is being used a lot, but a major factor is that it's a pre-made story ready to be shared. If people like the content, it's a one click to go ahead and share. All right. The third role of a growth PM is to be an experimenter. And I covered a little bit of that with the data-driven decision-making, but I would give you time to read over the execution when you have the slides online available, but I will just cover all the basics you need. When you write your spec, you should go over the problem, and that problem should be backed with data, looking at the users, looking at the product's user journey. You should state your proposal and your targeted user and the user state there. And are they in acquisition? Are they in activation state? Are they in retention state or lapsed? What user are you targeting? And then you list your assumptions, even if they seem redundant. You write down your hypothesis, your rationale. It could be just research or data, and you write down your success metrics. Then you forecast, and your forecast could be based on historical lifts. And then you calculate your ROI. You also write down your risk and guardrails. If you have any risk of a metric tanking because of your experiment, then write it down and call out what guardrail you will have in place to shut down your experiment automatically if that concerned metric drops. Now, planning the experiments. Planning involves your designer and your researcher. You create and evaluate many treatments. You should look at the trade-offs and the ROI of each of them, and if possible, conduct user research prior to development. Then you get to running the experiments, and here you can do A/B testing. Don't conflate too many experiments on a single target audience at one time. And finally, you get the results. You look for statistical significance. You watch out for false positives. And finally, you recommend what will you do with the results. If you see a lift, you will promote it to prod and build new experiments on top of it. If it's a regression, you will shut it down. If it's neutral, usually it's not worth keeping the experiment in the product because most features add more steps in the product funnel. But if your feature was removing some steps and you got a neutral result, maybe it's worth keeping it. And the last role is being a clear communicator. A PM communicates to everyone what they're going to do and why. They follow it up by saying when they're going to do it and how. Then they go and do the work, and after they complete it, they come back and they say what they have done and its results. And the PM also builds cross-team and cross-discipline collaboration by communicating common product goals, mutual wins, and saying what they or their team needs and what they or the team can give back. All right. Now that we have understood the essential roles a growth PM has to fulfill, let's think about what does it take to become a growth leader. To be a growth leader, you need to be a visionary influencer. You need to have these key skills. You need to drive visionary ideas. You need to build allies and consensus for your vision. You need to nurture a culture change. You need to help teams achieve early wins so that they buy into your vision. They understand that this does produce positive results. You need to celebrate the wins and failures with data. And lastly, you need to keep learning and teaching others. So let me illustrate some of these key skills with examples from my life. So to drive visionary ideas, I thought about the context of Microsoft being a big company with 166,000 employees. It's equivalent to about 100 small companies put together. So what's the big picture for Microsoft and for growth? And the big picture I drew was that all products at Microsoft have phenomenal growth by amplifying shared winning strategies. So what's missing in this big picture right now? What's missing from me achieving this big picture? Products today are living in silos by not sharing their growth wins or learnings. This is wasting talent, effort, time, and money. A unified forum to share growth efforts is missing. So then I asked myself, okay, how can the gap be filled? Products can share their growth efforts with each other to accelerate growth across the company. That's the vision. So how can this vision be achieved? By creating a unified forum where all products share their winning growth strategies and learnings. So I went about thinking of an execution plan. So I built allies and consensus on that vision. I started producing monthly newsletters and monthly meetings where at least 3 to 4 experiments which were either successful or they had learnings were listed from across the company. So what were the outcomes? There were viral share of my emails in multiple product teams. An increasing number of product teams started joining the forum. I started this in late September, and from October onwards, I had about 3 product teams who participated in newsletters and meetings, so they became part of the forum. And then come November, another 3 teams joined, December, another 3, and then I booked out for January and Feb, and you can see already I have 14 product teams who have joined the forum. Then multiple VP supporters from across Microsoft products across the company. And the final one was achieving cross-product growth wins. This is the one I'm really proud about. I shared a successful experiment that resulted in a 30% lift in user retention, and another team applied this experiment on their product, which resulted in a 32% lift in user retention for them and an 87x increase in conversion, which was phenomenal. Okay, the next skill that I want to talk about is nurturing a culture change, because a growth PM cannot do this alone. Even with a growth team, in the sense you have your small team of data scientists, engineer, designer, it is not enough. Growth requires a culture change inside the whole product team. So you can go about doing this by including and empowering every discipline to contribute ideas to the growth efforts so that they feel ownership of those growth efforts. You product brainstorm every 3 to 4 months to assess best ROI features. The reason you do that is because development is agile and growth tactics need to be agile as well. And when you figure out the best ROI together, you all are committed to follow through with it. You help your team and company by creating best practices doc. For instance, I wrote down experiment focus spec templates, experiment do's and don'ts, experiment checklist, and forecasting 101. These best practices doc help the rest of your team and company catch up and be on the same page as you. You start streamlining cross-discipline growth efforts so that all of you agree that these are the metrics that are your goals, and you start speaking the same language about why you're pursuing a certain avenue or not. You start taking trainings on growth experimentation and share back those trainings with your team and company. And you start opening up cross-team communication to share and foster growth learnings. And the last one is to keep learning and teaching others. I take trainings from Reforge, or Coursera is another one that's really good if you want to dive into data science and experimentation. Product School has the latest news from PMs working on products and experiments they just released. And then books, I love reading on behavioral economics genre, like Freakonomics, Outliers, the design of everyday things, and then product growth stories like 0 to 1, measure what matters, and growth mindset books like Range. And bloggers I like to follow are Andrew Chen, who, like I said, is a growth expert. There's also Scott Galloway. He's a bit controversial, but he does push your boundaries to make you really think about a matter and make your own opinion about it. And of course, industry news. Podcasts I love to listen are How I Build This. How I Build This captures users in the world who had some problem and they worked through a solution and launched a product and how they became successful. So pretty much our life, but at work, but for them, it's an achievement of their lifetime. So, and it's a fabulous celebratory achievement of their lifetime. So listening to those stories is amazing. Freakonomics Radio, Stuff You Should Know, Planet Money, all of these are great podcasts to follow. All right, to summarize, these are the key roles you need to fulfill to become a growth leader. The essential 4 roles that I had mentioned about a growth PM being an opportunity identifier, being a data-driven decision maker, being an experimenter, and being a clear communicator. And the last one is being a visionary influencer, where you drive your visionary ideas, you build allies and consensus, you nurture a culture change towards growth, you keep learning and teaching others about growth strategies, and you help teams achieve early wins. This is the path on how you can become a growth leader. And to have the final 3 takeaways of this entire navigation to growth leadership, Start by transitioning into growth PM if you're not already in that field. And the way you do that is to use your passion for growth to find opportunities that will let you develop the skills necessary for growth, like experimentation and growth strategies and all that. And then you keep working on it until they become your strengths. And this is a cycle that you can rinse and repeat for multiple different passions and strengths. Then to succeed as a growth PM, aggressively build your experience and expertise. Remember the 4 roles a growth PM has to fulfill. And finally, to become a growth leader, think big and hustle for your vision. Be a visionary influencer. And thank you so much for listening to my talk. I hope it was really helpful to you. If you have any questions, please reach out to me on LinkedIn.